Okay, it is another night and it is another edition of Pirates Postgame here on Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And the roller coaster ride that has been the Milwaukee Brewers series for the Pirates does come to an end, but it comes to an end in a way that many probably would have expected from this team throughout the entire season as they kind of get back to predicted form, and that is pretty lackluster and losing. So the Pirates lose 2 out of 3 to the Milwaukee Brewers to round out their second series of the 2020 bizarre season. I am your host, Mike Asti, and for this edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm going to be joined by a man that you may have seen on KDK TV, you may have heard on 93.7 The Fan, and you may actually have even heard and maybe seen occasionally way back in the day, even potentially with me on Champ Sports Network, where that is actually where we first became acquainted, and I had to throw that in there as part of it here with both of us on the show. We've actually kind of tagged along on several different ventures, even going back to both being Trib Live Radio alums. But none other than Josh Taylor is a big baseball mind here in the market, is joining me for this one. And yeah, the Pirates lose 3-0 to the Milwaukee Brewers. Pirates 0-1-1. That is the line. It is a goose egg, 1-1. It's going to be rough here on this one, but if you're joining me, thank you. And my condolences for you not going to bed right away after that one or having anything better to do. But regardless, the Pirates are losers 3-0 to the Milwaukee Brewers. Brewers 3 runs off 6 hits and a goose egg in the error column. And Josh, you're coming off a series where the Pirates should have won game 1. They blow it. They don't. There's a weather delay, and the Pirates find themselves in extras and then lose. They come back and get a victory in game 2 of this series, so it almost cancels things out. But then, to quote Eminem, the real Pittsburgh Pirates stood up. And they stood up, and then everyone sat back down again if you're facing the Milwaukee Brewers pitching here and Woodruff for the evening. Pirates, nothing on the board this game. They were out of it from the jump, really. What do you make of this, and what do you make of this kind of in totality with the season to this point?
Well, there's 2 things I take from it. Number one, I thought you had a great point that they should have won game 1 of this series and should have lost game 2 of this series. And in game 3, maybe they should have stayed at home. It's hard to really – I can't even say I'm shocked about it because this is something I've talked about in more than one space. Even in my own work on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call, which I'll be there this Friday and Saturday night. I talked about this last weekend. You're gonna have 3 basic facets of the game: offense, defense, and pitching. You need at least 2 to win any game, and one of them has to be pitching. And in the game where they actually got decent pitching, they wasted it because they couldn't get good offense, and it just turns into a really bad snowball effect because Joe Musgrove, who actually pitched a pretty good game, right, that effort gets wasted. And when you have pitchers that are coming out, when you have that effort wasted with Joe Musgrove, when you have the Chad Cool, Stephen Brault effort from last night wasted because the bullpen almost lets it go, it becomes a bad trend to waste efficient starting pitching. And especially when you get 1 hit in a game, when you get good starting pitching, it makes it really, really frustrating, not only because it's hard to win a game in that situation, but when you continue to do that over time, and now you've done it 2 nights in a row, you're going to get mixed results. You're going to get a day like 2 nights ago. You're going to get a day like yesterday, and then you're going to look at a day like today, and it probably wouldn't surprise you just because of the element of wasting good pitching and the element of wasting opportunities to win ball games. And it's like they're finding new ways to lose games, and tonight was a good way for them to continue to lose another one because – I should say it wasn't finding a new way because this happened to them in the first series of the season, right, where they couldn't put together no offense, but it's almost like they're just switching between alternatives and how they're going to lose games. And that's not a good trend to follow.
No, and they've switched out different lineups, and we're seeing Musgrove again, and he did start the first game of the season. And like the first game of the year against the Cardinals, actually, the last time I was hosting the postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, Musgrove pitched about 5 1/4. He pitched okay, 7 Ks there, 8 Ks today. But Musgrove's problem in game one and problem here in his second start, giving up too many long balls, and the Pirates issue, they can't connect on too many long balls in their favor. The offense just struggled. It's been struggling. You figured it was going to struggle, and then it's struggling here today. You mentioned Musgrove, though. It's almost an unlucky fortune for Musgrove even individually, because this guy could be a solid number 3 or 4 starter for me if you expect that out of him. But the problem is on this team, he's almost forced into must-win games. You almost got to get victories with Musgrove starting. He's almost having to be the ace of this team because of the injuries, because of all the issues, and because they're coming in undermanned coming into this season. Is there any hope for this team in terms of figuring out this rotation? Does Musgrove have to be the guy? Is there anyone else that could carry the load and maybe jump up there if it's not Musgrove, and maybe stop this from being a train wreck of a season? Because Musgrove here, not able to get the job done again, although not that bad in terms of starts for Musgrove.
No, there's only one other guy I can think of that might even be able to, put in that category, and that's Mitch Keller. And are you ready to do that yet? I think he has the potential to be that guy. Is it time to put him there yet? No, there's still a lot of proving ground that he has to walk through to get to that point. But I'm in the camp that Joe Musgrove, you're right, he is put into a very difficult position. He's forced into a tough spot, trying to be the head of the pitching staff that talent-wise, on paper, he probably should not be at the forefront of. If you have a healthy Jameson Taillon, if you have a healthy Chris Archer, you're probably not looking at Joe Musgrove being the guy in the forefront of this rotation. But the truth of the matter is, he's the guy that wants to be there. I mean, Musgrove isn't really shy about wanting to take on a leadership role and wanting to step up into the forefront. So for that, that's commendable, for wanting to be in the position that he probably is not in a fair spot to be in. But I'll make this argument. I wouldn't put it as much with Joe Musgrove not being able to cut the mustard, so to speak, as it being an effort of him not having to do it by himself. Because just a little bit of the basic run support probably makes these 2 starts by his a lot different as far as the outcome. If he just gets some basic average run support, and he couldn't get that. So it doesn't matter who's starting. It doesn't matter Joe Musgrove starting. It doesn't matter if Mitch Keller or a healthy Taillon or a healthy Chris Archer or the reincarnated ghost of Cy Young. Doesn't matter. If you can't get run support, no pitcher's worth it. And that's what makes it frustrating. At least I would think it's frustrating for Musgrove, because now you have to be nearly perfect when you don't get run support. And like you said, he's given up a home run in each of his last 2 starts. So, when you've done that, nearly perfect goes out of the window. And especially when you're not getting offense behind you, it's going to make it harder to get that job done.
Yeah, and he's getting some defense. We did see that from Ryan Reynolds here today, which is what Musgrove needs. He needs defense. He's going to rely on defense. He's actually striking out more batters than I would have expected. He's been more of a K machine than I would have expected, but it's feast or famine, and he's giving up the long ball. The team came back and gave him some run support in game 1 against the Cardinals in his first start. Nothing clearly here tonight. I mean, this is just a goose egg. 1 hit they barely scraped away and had the error in there. This is by far the worst box score of the season. In my luck, I'm hosting here because it might be the worst box score for a while here, for my luck. But yeah, Musgrove's a guy that it is some poor luck for him. But when you go down the situation for the Pirates, because it does hinge on what happens defensively, and Mike Asti, Josh Taylor here, Pirates version, it's the Pirates edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. What is the best lineup for this team for you? Because this clearly isn't it, but we've seen different incarnations already throughout this season. Polanco is now back. He's not been able to do anything yet. Ryan Reynolds, who had a great defensive play, is mightily struggling so far this season. You figure he's going to turn the corner. He might not do what he did last year, but you figure he'll turn it around. But most of these hitters are struggling overall. And to read the Musgrove line, 5.2, 3 earned runs off 4 hits, 8 strikeouts. ERA now 4.76. Again, if you think he's a 3 or a 4, that's an okay first 2 starts. He has to be the ace because of this team. but not enough run support at all. But would you throw in Osun more? What would you do for this lineup? What would be your perfect lineup? Because clearly they've not found it yet.
Well, the trick of that concept is I don't know if there is a perfect lineup for this team, because by saying perfect lineup, you're assuming that you have guys that can do all of the basic tenets that starting major league players have. And
Maybe
I don't
best
think they
lineup
have
might be better words.
That's a good way to look at it, because, and honestly, the best lineup, I'm not even sure the best lineup might make sense realistically, because the best lineup against the right-hander might not be the best lineup against the left-hander.
Sure.
So it might be, and if I have to find the best way to summarize it, it might be against the right-handed pitcher, which is probably the more preferable thing. You're going to see him more often. The best lineup for this team now, and this is going to sound crazy, but the numbers have bore it out the past week or so. The best lineup for this team right now has to have Colin Moran in it, which sounds crazy, but it's true. It has to have Josh Bell in it, which the visual results aren't backing it up, but it's true. Right. I really thought he was playing cricket in his last at bat, but that's beside the point. It has to have Brian Reynolds in it. It has to have Adam Frazier in it. And I believe it has to have Jose Osuna in it. I believe that is a thing. And Jose Osuna, for all intents and purposes, has a lot of the things that I was just talking about, as far as when you assume that some of these guys do all the basic things that a major league regular would do. Jose Osuna is probably one of the few that actually comes to closest to actually doing all those basic tenets. He's a pretty good defender. He's got a decent arm. He hits pretty well in certain situations. And I think that's a good thing to have in the lineup, especially a lineup that needs to have some kind of production or try to find some consistent production every day, because they haven't yet. But here's the thing. The days when Osuna's been in the lineup, he's actually hit pretty well. The days Colin Moran's been in the lineup, he's actually hit pretty well. So you got to start with those two guys and really work your way out. You'd like to hope that Josh Bell eventually starts to find more of a stride, but a lot of that might be dependent upon Colin Moran and Jose Osuna hitting behind him, and maybe Brian Reynolds and Adam Frazier hitting ahead of him. There's going to be a lot there that's going to have to make some sense, and maybe even Kevin Newman in some regards. You have to have those guys in that order, and honestly, if you want to start with those six guys, start right there. Newman, Reynolds, Moran, Bell, Osuna. What's that, 5? I'm missing one. I'll get there in a minute. Polanco would make 6. It's going to take those 6 guys just for starters. Everything else is going to come down to who you trust more. I trust Jacob Stallings as a catcher. Am I expecting him to be an offensive juggernaut? Absolutely not. I expect him to play really good defense, and I expect him to be a really good receiver and pitch framer. And he saved them a run tonight with that strikeout of Christian Yelich. It wasn't because the pitch was that great. It's because Stallings framed it really, really well. He took a pitch that was well out of the strike zone, framed it for a strike, and they got rid of Christian Yelich. Now, granted, Yelich is not hitting too great right now. It doesn't look like the Christian Yelich from last year or the Yelich that was tearing it up in Florida before he ended up in Milwaukee. But that was a great effort by Jacob Stallings and a good job of pitch framing to get that strikeout and save a run with a couple runners on base. So that's huge. So Jacob Stallings is a guy that I trust at catcher. The remaining question is, who do you trust as that 8th fielder, and who do you trust as your DH? Do you take one of those 6 guys I just mentioned and put them at the DH spot? Because there are some people that would say put Polanco at the DH spot. There are some people that would say put Josh Bell at the DH spot. The truth of the matter is, no matter which guy is in the lineup, one of them is probably going to be some level of a defensive liability. So that makes it complicated as to who you put in the DH role, because whoever you put there, you're going to have to put another guy in that position, in which case, if you have Osuna in right field, then maybe that allows you to put Gregory Polanco at the DH position. But if Polanco is your DH, that means Josh Bell's at first, which probably wastes Colin Moran's biggest defensive value as a first baseman. So now you're back at square one. How do you shift this, and how do you put different guys in different spots? And that's what happens when you don't have enough players that can do enough things consistently to be everyday guys. That's what makes it complicated. But I would start with those 6 guys, Jacob Stallings being the 7th. And after that, who are the other 2 guys? Who are the 2 guys that you trust? Do you trust Phillip Evans being that guy at third base? Does it have to be him, or can it be somebody else? Or is it Osuna at third base? But if you put Osuna at third, that means you're going to have to suffer through Polanco in the outfield. Is Gerard Dyson your center fielder? Is he your everyday guy? I know a lot of people don't trust him immediately out of the gate. But if you're going to have somebody that's remotely reliable in there, is it Dyson or is it Guillermo Heredia? You want to talk about impossible decisions, that's an impossible decision you're going to have to make. So when we're talking about the best lineup here, I don't think there's an answer that people are going to like. I think that's a good way to categorize it, because you're going to put somebody in that either hasn't been reliable to start out or people just don't want to see there. And again, if I want to tap into some, some good old fashioned rock music, you can't always get what you want. But it comes back to that frustration of, and I think a lot of people have voiced this in different ways. This team just does not have enough talent to do what every other team would do on an average everyday basis. And I think that's what makes it frustrating.
Yeah, I think, to say the least, and I think Pirates fans have certainly or should have come to terms by now with realizing they're not usually going to get what they want. This seems like this is one
Get in line, folks. Get in line.
That very, very rarely gets what they want, even during the winning days. They really weren't getting what they want in many respects. And again, the Pirates are losers, losing this series to the Milwaukee Brewers 3-0. And Game 3, which was a rubber match from 2 games that went the other way, Pirates blowing a game, then getting it back, canceling each other out. They end up losing the series nonetheless. Another series loss for Pittsburgh through these first 2. And the division keeps on going for the Pirates. The divisional games coming up against the Cubs throughout the weekend. It's not going to get easier because they're going to come in hungry. They're very, very good, and they're coming off a pretty poor outing, which means they're going to be better against you would figure, which is, again, the Pirates' luck. But 3-0 losers to the Milwaukee Brewers here on the Pirates edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live, speaking with Josh Taylor, and I am, of course, Mike Asti. And any of you there, I do see David and a few others. He was the first winner of our face-off program there, even though he did not beat me, but he did beat one of our pros. I have a victory under my belt. But he's there, so I asked him if he had any questions. Anybody else have any questions, feel free to hit us. If you don't, and I don't blame you because we're here in the latter half of an evening and this game was ugly, then we're going to move on. I do think, Josh, off of what you said, I know there's a large contingent, and I'm one of them, that feel Osun has got to get in this lineup at some point. He has to be a guy that you have an emphasis in putting in the lineup, just for the fact that in all reality, even with a reduced schedule and more playoff teams, it's still very unlikely the Pirates are going to be able to take advantage of any of that. You really are rebuilding throughout this year, and that's a guy that I think fans would then be getting what they want, because they would then be getting an entertaining guy that can see what he's worth moving on, regardless of where you put him. That's a key there. Normally, for most teams, when you see a guy like Josh Bell, you would think he screams DH. But they can't really do that with their team because they're also not sure about, you said, Polanco and other players. They almost seemingly have a DH rotation. I would prefer to get out of that rotation, just throw Bell there, get Osuna somehow in this lineup. You do need to have Moran right now while he's hitting. We'll see how long that goes. So it'll be interesting what happens here. I do actually think, David, we have a question here. All right, this is kind of where we're going here, Josh. David asks, at what point do you raise the white flag and play the kids? So I guess what I'm saying, and then some, what point do you legitimately say outwardly, we're playing all the kids, the best lineup is meaningless, we're just basically playing, in our eyes, a practice to see what we have for the future? What point do you do that?
Well, here's something that we kind of look over, or I should say overlook it, because it's one of those details that's kind of out of their control. They would have had a really good opportunity to play another one of those young guys, or play one of the kids, so to speak, earlier this season if Ke'Bryan Hayes doesn't contract COVID-19. If he doesn't test positive, maybe that's one of your chances to actually play one of the kids, so to speak, and see what he has. Because if you have Ke'Bryan Hayes playing third base, you got a constant third base glove and arm, and you don't have to worry about that spot defensively. That's one spot in the lineup. You don't have to wonder, well, should we protect this kid at DH because he's not that great defensively? He's a pretty good third baseman, and his repertoire and his resume in the minor league says so as far as his defensive reputation. So that's one guy who could have actually answered that question for you and could have done that at the very beginning of the season, but COVID-19 changed that plan. As far as when you play the kids, that's a great question, because you can make the argument that as long as you have a group that has a Gregory Polanco, a group that has an Adam Frazier, a group that has the Guillermo Heredias and Jared Dysons of the world, it's going to be very impossible to play those kids, because I don't know any manager that's going to turn down veteran MLB talent. It's just There aren't many managers that say, hey, we're going to not give you vets and run with a bunch of rookies sight unseen. Granted, Derek Shelton's seen a good bit of them because he was there in spring training before it got cut short. But I don't know a lot of managers that are going to be this eager to do it this early unless you had them from the outset. I would have preferred, if that would have been the move that they were going to make, I would have preferred that you didn't make a move to get a Guillermo Heredia, that you didn't make a move to get a Gerard Dyson, because now it seems like you're just getting major league names because you feel like you need major league names. As opposed to, now granted, this all happened before spring training. This all happened before COVID-19 kind of ruined what should have been the 2020 season. So hindsight is 2020, pun intended. But if you wanted to look at it in the terms of this 60-game season, it's not like you can undo those moves now. So in terms of a 60-game season, the idea would be, go in with the kids and see what they have. That's actually preferable for me because I look at this 60-game season as you're not going to have the pitching and the starting rotation to get you that far. You definitely don't have the bullpen to get you that far and carry across the threshold. So why not see what you have as far as those young position players and the young starting pitcher in the case of Mitch Keller? Why not see what you have to keep Brian Hayes if he had been available? Why not see what you had in a Cole Tucker, which is why I think we're seeing him get reps in the outfield. Because not only is it an opportunity to see what Cole Tucker really can do, what he can contribute, it's also an opportunity to get that glut of middle infielders some at-bats, because you got 4 or 5 guys that can play in the middle infield, and you can only have 2 of them out there at a time. So it makes it more complicated, unless you thought about maybe putting Cole Tucker at third base and letting him get infield reps. This is one of those things that you have to keep shuffling around because, well, this guy can do this and this guy can't do that. Well, this guy can do this, but he can't do that. So having the kids in might make that job a little bit easier, but that's something you would have had to decide this past winter as opposed to deciding it in July now with the season shortened. But in theory, it would have been the better move, I think, if you're really going to try to see what young talent you have, both on this major league roster and in this system. It would have been the smarter move to go with those guys early and see what you have, because it's not like Brian Reynolds is that unfamiliar. It's not like Newman's unfamiliar. It's not like Tucker, for that matter, is unfamiliar. The only guy who probably is out of that small group I'm talking about, Mitch Keller being in that group, the only guy who really is unfamiliar is Hayes. He's the only guy that really would be the one that's out of his element having to adapt. The rest of them have been there before. So run those guys out there, see what they do for 60 games, because not only are you assessing what you have, it's a great chance for those guys to say, look, this is a really good 60-game audition for me. If I'm going to win a starting spot in 2021, I need to go out and see what I can do in these 60 games in 2020. So that would have been the more logical thing to do. The more logical thing, just in my estimation, if you want to get the most out of this young talent, would have been to do it from the very beginning.
And that probably would have been the smartest play when you look at the end of the season in retrospect, because, again, this season does not seem like it's going anywhere. Nobody thought it was going to go anywhere, and that was immaterial of COVID-19, because a lot of the Pirates' issues and who are not there, say, key contributors to this bullpen the last few years, some of them either injured, some of them gone, some of them in prison. That's certainly been an issue for this team now, and those scenarios are all separate from the virus. Those would have been a problem for this team even in a 162-game schedule. Same thing with losing Archer and company in the starting rotation, making Musgrove playing well or have to be in a position where he's well above himself. Yola enjoyed this. David agreed with you mostly. He did say that he wants Tucker in there more. We got to see him a little bit in the summer camp preseason type of format there before the season got fully underway, where he did get an outfield spot. He actually had a solid catch in the outfield. It seems like maybe defensively he can play anywhere. Problem with him, he can't really hit. So you are really losing an at-bat with Cole Tucker in there. And also, to what you're saying and what I'm saying, it's hard to say that if you're a rookie manager who then is going to have tons of losses on his resume, and very possibly when this team ever does turn the corner, he's no longer there because he's been fired, because it's been tons of losing for several years in a row. We do actually have an interesting comment here where Patrick Davis, and I'm going to throw his name out there since this was so outlandish, is it me, or does the Pirates actually have a sneaky, low-key, decent team? Definitely not top 3 in the division, but an interesting club. I smell 2010 Astros is also out there. So I'm not really sure. I guess Josh will figure out and have to hit up Patrick if he is correct in about 4 years.
I'll give him one thing.
Okay.
if you're talking 2010 Astros, that means you're probably looking at a young nucleus of talent that you hope to have explode at the same time, because that's what the Astros had. They had a bunch of top 5 picks that all exploded at the same time. Now, the only flaw in that logic is most of those guys that would qualify those top 5 picks or those first rounders in a certain span, most of those guys either aren't here or haven't gotten here yet. So it makes it hard for me to look at it the exact same way. I mean, you'd like to hope that's the best case scenario. You'd like to hope that a Cole Tucker, starts to make that move. You'd like to hope that a Kevin Newman makes that jump. You'd like to hope that Brian Reynolds has finally started to maybe taking some pressure off of himself. And I think that's what it is for him. I think he's just pressing a little bit too hard. But you'd like to think he finds his form and doesn't maybe start to slump in that early part of his career. You'd like to hope a Brian Hayes comes up and actually does catch fire early, or at least does some of the basic things, even from a defensive standpoint early, and maybe the bat comes with time. So if you want to look at it in terms of a young nucleus that has potential to maybe blossom, I don't think it's that outlandish. I don't think it's that crazy. The problem is there's just a lot of ifs that have to happen in that group, because the 2010 Astros, that nucleus, the George Springers, the Altuves, the Correas, the Bregmans, a couple of those guys I got to see up close. I got to watch George Springer play in Double-A when I was covering minor league baseball out in Arkansas. I got to watch Alex Bregman up close when he played at LSU. Those guys came in the door as legit talent. Like, there was no question. Alex Bregman walked in the door from LSU, and you're like, that kid can play. George Springer, I saw pretty much dominate a Double-A All-Star game, and there's a bunch of us media guys sitting around doing batting practice, and we're taking bets. Now, I want to say this is 2013 maybe, and we're taking bets at this 2013 Double-A All-Star game of when George Springer is going to get to the show. A couple of us said 2 years. A couple of us said, maybe he'll be there, as a late September call-up in 2020, maybe late September call-up 2014, maybe early 2015. One guy, deadpan straight face, he'll be there next year. George Springer got to the majors in 2014. So he won that bet, and he was a legit talent that way. So if you want to look at this group like the 2010 Astros, I will say the 2010 Astros had way more pedigree and way more talent on paper, but it doesn't mean the potential for this group isn't there. So if there's one little hint of optimism, it's maybe that you have a small group of guys that you hope take that leap.
Yeah, and that's what you have to do in a market like Pittsburgh. That's what they did that led to the 2013-2015 run. That's what the Royals did that led to back-to-back pennants in a ring. That's what other
really good pedigree with that Royals nucleus. Really good pedigree.
Yeah. This might even be more comparable to the Royals because they didn't have a lot of people that were surrounded by tons of hype. They just eventually turned the corner, whereas the Astros did have all those very, very high draft picks. But there have been small markets who have been able to seize the day and have those small runs the Pirates did not that long ago. That's not the case now. So we will see. It's going to be 3 or 4 years down the road that we're able to actually determine whether that's accurate. But that's some pretty lofty optimism coming off of, and I'll read the line again for you, 3-0, 0 runs, 1 hit, and 1 error for the Pirates, and potentially their worst line of the season so far, maybe the worst line of the year. Josh, we got to do this, and I know you've done this before when you hosted a post-game show for the Pirates, and this is rough sledding. I know you're aware of this.
Oh man,
we're only a few games in though. So maybe you'll start feeling bad for me as we get here in the dog days of summer, although I have a reduced season. So it's not going to be as long as the gauntlet that you ran for.
You're ahead of the curve. I'll give you that. You're ahead of the curve having the shortened season.
Okay. Yeah, that's a nice benefit here. Regardless, though, it is the Brewers 3, the Pirates nothing. They do win the series. The Pirates do go to Chicago off another series loss. But we got to do this. So 3 up, 3 down is the thing we do here on the Pirates edition of the Pittsburgh Postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. 3 up, 3 down. I'm gonna leave it to you and see if I can sprinkle anything in there. Obviously, it's hard to have much up in a game that you have 1 hit and don't get any runners home. But there were some entertaining aspects of this game. There's some meme potential for maybe a softball down the middle for you. But what are your 3 up and 3 down for this miserable Pirates game here on a Wednesday?
3 up, 3 down. I'll go Musgrove as one of the 3 up. I thought the fact that he struck out 8 guys out of the 17 outs that he got is pretty impressive. And he walked 3. Granted, that home run really came back to bite him. And as a matter of fact, he gave up 2 that really came back to hurt him. But when you strike out 8 guys in less than 6 innings, that's something that's going to catch a lot of people's attention. So I'll say Musgrove's in that group. I will go with, I'm going to say Phillip Evans as one of my 3 up. 1 for 3 again tonight. He draws another walk. He reaches base 2 more times, and he's one of those guys that people are looking at going, who is this guy and where did he come from? His story, his backstory is really interesting, how his path has gotten to this point. A really, really gruesome injury a couple of years back, actually being up with the Mets, I believe it was, with their big league club, got in a really ugly sliding incident at second base and had a really bad injury and had to miss some time. Then he was in the minor leagues last year, finally gets a shot back here in the majors. But he's a guy that's getting on base. He's the one guy that got on base at all tonight. It was Phillip Evans, and he did it twice. So he's got to be one of the 3 up. And the third, I'll go with Robbie Erlin. I thought Robbie Erlin had a pretty impressive line, couple of innings, 3 strikeouts for the left-hander. He looked pretty good. Now, granted, we talked about that at bat where Christian Yelich struck out with the Jacob Stallings framing job. That was while Erlin was on the mound. So, but all the same, Robbie Erlin comes in, and he's a guy that a lot of people aren't thrilled about. But you need a left-hander that's consistent out of the bullpen. 3 strikeouts in 2 innings. So I'll go with those 3 for my 3 up. I think. Do you want me to do the 3 down, or are you going to handle those because there's so many to pick from? That's up to you.
Are you used to me being Mr. Pessimism here throughout my career?
I figured I did the more difficult part. I'd let you shoot the fish in the barrel, so to speak.
I mean, well, I do like your 3 up, to be honest. And this is actually, you're enjoying this. This is very funny. Musgrove has 2 starts on the year. They're both games the Pirates lost. He has been an up both times. So, I mean, I don't, again.
It's hard to fault the starter that when he goes in, he pitches into the 6th inning, he gives up only 3 runs, and you give him no run support. I can't fault the guy for that. He kept you in the game. You just couldn't put any offense together. And once again, one guy got on base, and he did it twice.
Yeah.
It's not enough.
I think actually it's rare, but I think most people here have reasonable expectations for Musgrove. Musgrove is a guy that should not be thought of as an ace of your staff. He shouldn't be forced into that role. He is now. But yeah, if he pitches almost 6 innings, strikes out 7 or 8, and only allows 3 runs, it's hard to really ask for much more. This is not going to be a Hall of Famer that's throwing the lights out and going to be throwing no hitters.
Mike, most managers are going to take that sight unseen. They're going to tell if you walked up to a manager before a game and he's in his office during that pregame press availability, and you say, Skip, your pitcher's going to go 5 2/3. He's going to strike out 8 and give up 3 runs. You want to take that now? They're going to take that sight unseen.
Yeah.
Now, granted, you don't tell them what the offense does or does not do, but you tell them, you say, we don't know anything else is going to happen in the game, but that's what you're going to get out of their starter. Most managers will take that deal.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at 3 down, though, and I'll give you some time here to add to this if you want. I mean, three down, I think at this point, you do got to bring up Reynolds. The guy's hitting 100 on the season. You don't want to put any pressure on a guy that he has to do what he did last year, where he came pretty much out of nowhere and had an historic season, a Rookie of the Year type of season. You can't expect that again. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that again, but you do have to expect more than what he's providing. And when we talk about playing the young kids and if Tucker's going to get in there more often, we're not including the Josh Bells and even the Ryan Reynolds of the world. And Ryan Reynolds is off of 1 quality season, but now he's being characterized as a veteran of this team, of the future of this team. So he needs to play like it. He needs to substantiate his spot in the lineup. If we're not sure what the best lineup is, he can't just go ahead and swing and miss every other at bat and then figure, well, last year I had 20 plus doubles, so I'm going to stay in the lineup.
That's kind of unfair to put on a guy like Brian Reynolds because there's really no one else to give that role to. So, I mean, that's really the issue of it all, because that mantle should be on a Gregory Polanco. That mantle should be on an Adam Frazier. That mantle should be on a Josh Bell, as that guy that should be able, or those guys, plural, that should be able to step in and provide some offense when this team needs it. So the fact that we've have to default it to Brian Reynolds, I think it's more of an indictment on the team as a whole than it is on Brian Reynolds. That said, yeah, I think we expect a lot more out of him. But remember, he hasn't played a full season yet. When a guy plays a full season, then you maybe put some expectations on him.
That's very true. And this has been a weird season where he didn't get the full offseason work. So this is a little bit weird for a guy looking at a sophomore bounce back. This might be more of a slump just on the weirdness of the season. I will say that this will make you happy because I'm going to also include this man. Josh Bell is absolutely a down. Not only is he not getting on base and not getting a hit, we're looking at 3 strikeouts. He's hitting 174 on the year.
And they're bad at bats. They're bad at bats. That last at bat.
There was one where he was swinging and missing at the ground. I think he picked up some dirt there on the bat. He's had some bad. That's the one thing. Reynolds has not got hits, but he's had quality at bats while not getting on. It's weird to look at, but you actually can investigate these at bats if they're taking a lot of pitches, if they're making the pitcher work. Josh Bell's just going up there hacking away, trying to look for the long ball every other at bat, and it's not working out for him. And it might just be that he realizes there's pressure for him to hit the home run because they have no one else that has pop.
I'll add the third guy if you don't mind, because there's another guy who had some bad at-bats tonight, and that's Adam Frazier. You got the guy at the top of the lineup, and he's not taking pitches. He's not extending at-bats. And you're going up against a guy like Woodruff who struck out a handful of guys more than Musgrove did, and a lot of it's because the top of the lineup made his job so easy. When your top of the lineup isn't giving you good quality at-bats, the opposing starter couldn't have an easier gift handed to him. And that has to start with the guy at the top of the lineup. So we're talking about Adam Frazier who's having bad at-bats, Phillip Evans, who was the only guy who reached base tonight, Josh Bell, who's having bad at-bats, Colin Moran, whom you can now pitch around because there's really no more of a threat, and Brian runs behind him, who's also having bad at-bats. So we're talking about out of 5 guys, 2 guys are real offensive threats, and 3 are having bad at-bats, and they're kind of all segmented in between the good ones.
Right.
What is there to expect at this point? What is there to really realistically expect as far as an output?
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, the only other comment is, and this is also from a fan in there, he mentioned the entirety of the bullpen as an up. I know you went from
That's
early.
Fair. That's very fair.
So that's the only change we have here with the fans. But again, the Pirates lose to Milwaukee. They lose the series. Getting 1, so that's something that, they get the one that maybe you wouldn't have expected them to get based on how things went. They blow game 1. They end up winning game 2 somehow with a comeback victory, and then this miserable performance here in game 3. Mike Asti, Josh Taylor here on the Pirates edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And Josh, that makes us predict the future, and maybe with the Pirates, it's a little easier than with others based on what we've seen here. But it's a roller coaster ride, so as you know, you just never know what you're going to get. It's the box of chocolates here type of sports team. But they're looking ahead now to the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs, they're coming off some series victories. They're a quality team. They won 2 out of 3 against Milwaukee, who the Pirates just lost 2 out of 3. The Cubs are coming off of a pretty poor performance here this evening as we're recording this, but it's still the Cubs. They still have a pretty locked-in rotation. They have a mix of veterans and youth and a pretty solid lineup, even though this is a little bit of a new era of Cubs baseball with Madden gone from being skipper of this team, and now they're several years away from the championship, looking to get back there. What are you looking for in that series? I mean, you got to also feel like fans are going to have to look for different things than just victories out of some of these games in terms of, can those players that we mentioned, the Bells, the Reynolds, the Fraziers, have better at bats? Can they be better? Are you going to switch the lineup around? Does it depend on what happens in this series if you maybe just go ahead and start playing the kids? Because I've seen the math done, and I'm not a math major, but each one of these games counts for 2.7 from a regular season out of the 162. So right now they're like, 3 point whatever, 4 point something out of whatever the math would be there. So it's pretty poor. What are you looking forward to in this Cubs series? What should fans be looking at in terms of this team? It's probably going to be ugly, but what are you looking at?
It could get ugly, but not for the reason that you think.
Okay.
There's 2 things I'm looking at. I'm looking at the starting pitching for the Pirates being able to set the tone, because here's the good news. You got Trevor Williams tomorrow. You got Mitch Keller the day after. Those are 2 things you look at and say, okay, maybe you got a shot if you could just get some average offensive output. It doesn't have to be 5 runs a game. If you can get between 3 and 4, you're going to be in every game you play in, especially against this Cubs team. And this is the one thing that people overlook. Yes, that lineup is loaded with some really good young talent. Yes, they've got some good starting pitching. But if you can get into that bullpen, you can beat this team. That Cubs bullpen, we saw it. Well, I guess we didn't see it. I was kind of looking at it as it was unfolding. I was kind of watching back and forth between MLB Game Day and the game that was actually going on. But that Cubs bullpen's had some rough days in the past couple of weeks. It has not been that reliable. So if you can get the kind of starting pitching that maybe a Trevor Williams and a Mitch Keller can give you to stay in the game and maybe get to this bullpen and get a couple runs against them, you can beat this team. Remember, this is a team that gave Josh Hader the blues a night ago. So this is something you look at and say, wait a minute, this team got over in Josh Hader? How'd that happen? It's a lot easier task to get over in this Cubs bullpen than it is with Josh Hader. That's what I'm going to throw out there. So if I'm looking at something, I'm looking at really good starting pitching, giving them a chance to win as long as they have at least average offensive output and an opportunity to get after a bullpen that could very easily fall apart if pressed hard enough.
And that's what happened here tonight. That's what happened to the Cubs here tonight. The bullpen.
That's how it could get ugly, because if both bullpens pull another performance like we saw in these previous two games of this series in Milwaukee, we could be having this same discussion all over again in about 3 days.
Yeah, and maybe I'll bring you back on for another Musgrove start, because that seems to be the streak for me personally.
Oh, geez.
2-4, the Cubs 4-2 on the year. The Cubs are coming off of their worst game of the season, a 12-7 loss to the Reds. And Reds is maybe a team the Pirates are more on par with, even though some could argue the Reds have even more talent and some predicting more from them.
More reliable starting pitching, too. Sonny Gray went out there and actually gave him a pretty good game. The Reds bullpen just couldn't really keep the Cubs at bay, but Sonny Gray had a pretty good game tonight.
Right. And then it did collapse towards the end, which is kind of what you're thinking maybe happens between these two teams. So it will be interesting to say the least. The Cubs coming in again 4-2, the Pirates 2-4. And these are big games. Every game is, because now you're in a reduced schedule. So if the Pirates could somehow have a dominant series, they could weirdly be in the race. If not, then they're fading pretty soon. And then you're looking at the conversation of when do you play the kids. So we will see what happens as they meet the Cubs all throughout the weekend. That is the next series on tap for your Pittsburgh Pirates. Pirates losers 3-0 to the Milwaukee Brewers. No runs off one hit and an error. The Brewers putting those 3 up there. Musgrove another loss, but another solid start, and all I want to dare say a quality start for Joe Musgrove.
1 out away from a quality start on paper.
Yeah, I almost want to give it to him based on the reasonable expectations for him, but pretty much almost a quality start literally, and a pretty solid start for what you really can call it. He gave up the 3 runs, but again, 3-0 for Milwaukee in the victory. The Brewers win the series, winning 2 out of 3 in a roller coaster ride of a series. The Pirates lose another series, 2-4 on the year, and they will meet a team that's been the class of the division. And we'll see now kind of a question mark around them in a new era of Cubs baseball for this season. And they've also been a roller coaster ride, but they have more talent, and that's always kind of what you want when you're not really sure what the result's going to be. We will see, though. The Cubs coming into that game 4-2 and coming in off of a loss. Josh, I definitely appreciate the time here for you. I definitely appreciate you joining me here. Patrick Davis just trying to be as competitive as possible. Well, they're trying. I will say that they are trying. Whether they're the kids, whether the little young, still kind of young veterans, or whoever it is, they're trying, to say the least. No one's sandbagging it out there, and we're trying not to sandbag it here on the broadcast, depending on no matter what we see and depending on the results here. But Josh, I appreciate the time for sure. Any final words? I'll give you the final word here, and I'll definitely have to bring you back on for either a post-game show or even my show in general here on PSL. Speechless.
Expect the unexpected. That's my final words. Expect the unexpected, because we talk about 2 series of this season, and it's been 6 games. That's 10% of the season, the shortened season already. So we're things don't look that great, but expect the unexpected. Expect the unexpected as far as a couple teams that could go nuts here in the next month or 2, and expect the unexpected as far as what you're going to see from this group of young talent. That's one of the downsides. When you have young talent that's trying to find its way, when you have a Brian Reynolds situation last year, that's what's fun to see. But those slumps come around too. Remember, Josh Bell had his sophomore slump. His didn't look too great. There might be a Brian Reynolds sophomore slump that becomes pretty pronounced. That might not look too great. So expect the unexpected in that regard, and expect some ridiculously high scoring games. I think we've seen enough already across baseball as a whole. These first few games, there have been some really, really wild games because bullpens as a whole, not just the Pirates, not just the Brewers, not just the Cubs. There have been some really shaky, unreliable bullpens. So we might see some kind of wild, wacky roller coaster games that we saw in the second game and the first game of this Pittsburgh-Milwaukee series. It could happen a lot more. So expect the unexpected.
And we have been expecting the unexpected, not only in the world, but certainly this baseball season. It has been a very entertaining season nonetheless. So again, Josh Taylor, you can watch him on the nightly sports call there on KDK TV.
Friday and Saturday this week. I'll be there.
This Saturday night there, Josh Taylor hosting.
And Friday night. I'll be there both days.
There you go. You have a weekend with Josh while you have a weekend with the Pirates versus the Cubs. So maybe more conversation with Josh. If you didn't get your question in during this show, you can hit him up there on the nightly sports call there, as they, I'm sure, will talk Pirates Cubs at some point.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot more to discuss, but I'm sure they will talk Pirates Cubs at some point, much to Josh's chagrin, possibly. You've heard him also on 93.7 The Fan, as I said. You've also heard him with me, both being Trib alums and also alums, and I'll say both Hall of Famers of the illustrious Champs Sports Network.
Now I got to check my phone. I'm waiting on the text message to come in later from someone.
I'm sure you're, yeah. I'm going to have him on one of these too, and we'll give it in the reverse, and he can give it back to us. But
I love it.
Yeah. Well, hit us up on the family of networks: Pittsburgh Sports Now, Steelers Now, WV Sports Now, Pittsburgh Hockey Now, Pittsburgh Soccer Now, and of course the channel here, PGH Sports Live, PSL here at Pittsburgh Sports Live on YouTube. Make sure down on the bottom of the screen you hit the subscribe bell. Make it easier for us to get the content to you and get instant notification when games end, when videos get popping up there, and when my show also happens. And yeah, the Pirates lose another one. They are now 2-4 in the year. They go to a series against the Cubs. So, as Josh Taylor put it, expect the unexpected.